welcome back to the Periphery. Today we have, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but we have yet another fantastic interview.
We do.
A conversation. This time we're hosting Magali from Penn Law. She is, you know, like us, grappling and building expertise in these technical, esoteric, hard to parse through and understand fields.
As you know, I went to Stanford for undergrad, graduated in 2015, was a fuzzy, very much on the social sciences side.
Just like we are.
Yeah. And after that, I ended up going to the London School of Economics to pursue a master's degree in inequalities and social science. So sticking in the same realm, knew I cared about equity issues. I grew up in a pretty diverse and interesting home environment. I come from a multicultural background. So my dad is French and immigrated to the States when he was a teenager, sort of had a scrappy sort of way into America. So he like moved to Hawaii first, was a cook, then moved to LA, somehow met my mom. It's a long story. But anyway, so my mom is Black. Her family, her mother's side of the family is from Louisiana and father's side is from the South as well. So they somehow met in LA, and as a result of a very sort of fun multicultural family, and grew up in separate households though in Venice, California. And at the time it was not this sort of fun Silicon Beach place that I think my classmate of a couple years older, Evan Spiegel, probably helped create. It's a very Snapchat, yeah.
And Venice has a great reputation these days.
It's a very different place than when I grew up. I'll put it that way. And for good reasons and bad reasons. And but what I liked most about it was the fact that it was super diverse and it really was a community. And so I think having that upbringing was really important to me and got me asking questions about equity, financial equity, racial equity, like what does this stuff mean for different communities of color? And what can I do after pursuing all these fancy degrees to help with that and sort of try to understand some of these issues that are just hard to parse through, but really important.
So how did technology factor into all of this? As you were kind of studying inequality and coming from this quote unquote fuzzy background that we also come from.
Yeah, so I think it's a good question. At Stanford, I think I had a really huge aversion to everything tech related, primarily because it was very clearly at the forefront. So that meant that there was a little bit of a divide between, the fact that we even have this colloquial term for fuzzies versus techies is like sort of silly, but
I've heard about that. You Stanford undergrad.
Yeah, it's an undergrad thing. I don't think it's floating around the grad schools as much. But it was a real thing. It definitely was a real thing. And especially, during the time that I was there, 2011 to 2015, you're seeing all these startups pop up left and right. Stanford's really at the center of a lot of these like tech innovations. Silicon Valley is everything that everyone is talking about all the time. And when you're studying something like the civil rights movement or, how ancient communities, practiced certain cultural practices that they've practiced for a long time, you sort of have a disjointed view of, what's going on. So I studied history and that was really informative, but there was very much sort of a separation from all of the tech stuff that was going on. What does that mean for careers, right? So I think that's where tech comes in. It becomes this sort of giant field that a lot of Stanford folks go into. And at the time, I didn't really feel like that was a space for me to go into. I didn't feel like it was a career field that was available to me. People, casually and sort of jokingly or not so jokingly say, what do you do with a history degree? You could do a lot of things. Primarily, you learn
including
about
working
the world.
in tech, apparently.
And you could also work in tech with a history degree. So I had a little bit of an aversion to that at first, but I had plenty of friends who were in tech, right? And that was something that was really interesting to them. And I was exposed through them to tech.
There was a lot I related in this conversation with her, particularly when it comes to the barriers of entry and kind of feeling like these fields are not accessible. I think, Jess, you were talking about the false dichotomy between
fuzzy and techie. I mean, when I heard those terms, that was new to me too, and it kind of made me laugh because like
we're all fuzzies.
Like, what about what if you're going to medical school? Are you a fuzzy? I know some friends in medical school that would be like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I thought like, especially in academia, the fuzzy techie false divide really is just like a question of whether you can do math. And Magali mentioned early on how she associated tech with her experience with calculus, which was not a good experience in college.
I didn't quite find an entry point that felt natural to me. And some of the social impact tech stuff just wasn't hitting the mark for me for some reason. And maybe it was my own sort of personal bias and aversion to all things tech. I sort of ended up lumping it in a bucket with calculus. That was a traumatic experience for me, my first quarter of undergrad.
I think that's a very relatable experience.
There was no reason for me to have done that to myself. So here we are today.
And that's interesting because math really doesn't have anything to do with the issues that we're talking about. You know, we're not even talking about the technical aspects from computer science that might apply, but even though they really have limited relevance when we're talking about social issues and we're talking about policy using these technologies. You have to understand the interface between the power of these technologies and the people that they affect. And that is far removed. And I think Magali, her career is proof of this. Very far removed from the very mathematical and technical aspects of computing, and much less just general calculus. And so, yeah, like hearing her story about overcoming those psychological barriers was inspiring, and also I thought I saw a lot of ourselves in her.
Oh, totally. I mean, just for me personally, part of why I'm in the field that I am, I felt there was a discomfort in me in college in general as like a Black person, but even more so in these STEM fields where, I mean, part of my reason of going into tech was I had a mentor when I first got into law school telling me, go into tech, it's going nowhere. And then moreover, when we got into that data privacy class, for the first time I felt called in. I saw myself in these issues. I saw that these issues weren't removed from my experience as a person and my enjoyment of life. And, there's so much relatability there where, it's not a technological thing. It's a society and culture thing that technology in many ways serves as a barrier.
Yeah. I also just want to say it really resonated with me too. And I think probably a lot of people can relate to the fact that like her identity wasn't the first reason that she gave for like the reason that she didn't do tech, like the reason that she was, but then when you pressed her on it, she was sort of like, you know what, now that I think about it, like I probably just didn't feel comfortable.
If I take a step back, I don't want to put a sort of particular label on it, but I can't ignore the obvious. I am a Black woman in a field of folks who do not look like me or have similar backgrounds as me, which I grew up in a very sort of multicultural setting. I went to an international school. That's not necessarily a problem for me per se, but I think that it did sort of create these sort of unspoken barriers. And that translates into stereotype threat and all types of things. There's so many studies on this. And unfortunately, it just didn't create sort of a welcoming space. And I keep thinking about this because it shouldn't just be, what does the community look like on its face? But that is unfortunately important. And the reason why it's important is because of the language the language that's used in those spaces, and the doors into those spaces. Who's opening those doors? Who's bringing you into these conversations, these spaces? So like what you're doing, opening this forum for folks to come discuss these issues in a sort of, lower barrier to entry way, allows for more opportunity to actually feel comfortable in this space.
And like, I totally relate to that. Like, I didn't take a single like technological focused class in college, even though I was interested in it, because I just felt like, I don't know. I just didn't feel like I belonged in that class. But then I feel like when I came to Stanford and saw everyone's different backgrounds that were interested in the same issues, and I was like, if they can do it, I can do it. And I think that is one thing that like we definitely try to push on the Periphery. Like in our conversation with Kai, like his background was in humanities and now he's working at Visa. Like that's huge. And I just hope that no one feels like they are not equipped because of like their prior education, because of their upbringing, to like be in this field and like be a force in this field.
Yeah, and I just want to add that Kai studied sociology, Magali studied history. Those are my majors, and and so combine them, and I just think that
August is the perfect combination.
But one thing that sociology taught me, and history, was that as much as as I was thinking about how could I break into tech, because like all of us, I felt this intuition that it was important and fascinating, but also I felt like I just didn't fit that mold of someone who could be confident talking about these issues. And I think that you can go in both directions. One direction, which Magali also talked about, is connecting her interest in equity, her quote unquote fuzzy, but very important and I mean arguably existential societal interests with new and evolving technologies. And she did that through activism and through being engaged in organizations that were very, very focused on social issues. Another thing that I think is also useful is expanding your definition of technology. And this relates to what we were talking about with our interview with Jonas a few weeks back, where we were comparing old-fashioned contracts with smart contracts. Smart contracts we consider technology. Why don't we could talk about regular contracts as technologies? Because they are in many ways. Like a broader social view of technology, recognizing that the lines are so blurry that they are pretty much arbitrary. And recognizing that there's all these forms of technology, and ultimately what Magali said, which is that every technology tends to create a lot of opportunity to do good or bad, but you've got to use it, and that's where you need a lot of humanistic and societal awareness, a lot of working knowledge about that.
The internet, that is probably one of our biggest tech innovations, at least in our lifetime and our parents' lifetime and our grandparents' lifetime. That is extremely enabling for a lot of social issues to be solved. Talk about access, communication, resources. It just opens up this whole new opportunity, right? And so, yes, I do think that different tech initiatives, whatever it is, and tech companies have the opportunity to do that. But it's an opportunity. It's not necessarily, it's an opportunity that actually needs to be capitalized on, not just spoken about casually. And so I'll be honest, let's take the company that I work for, tech company with social impact goals. While I was working there, I was very frustrated because it felt heavy on the tech. Well, I wouldn't say heavy on the tech, just heavy on the business. I'll put it that way, because we tend to sort of call everything a startup and a tech startup, whatever, just because it's a business that happened like post the year 2000 does not mean it's necessarily tech startup, but that's what everything's being called. So heavy on the business side. And at times I felt like it was less heavy on the social side. And I was hoping for a slightly different balance. But really grateful for those skills. And one thing I will say is that you sort of have to understand what is your own definition of social impact? What does that mean? Like, does that mean like, oh, okay, like, yes, this person now has a loan that they have to pay back with interest, so that sucks for them. You could see it through that lens, or you could see it through the lens of, well, if they didn't get that loan, they would not be going to Harvard Business School, period. And so who knows what that would have led to.
I think that both lenses are very appropriate, especially in this century. when we're looking at new technologies, and it's making us question what technology actually is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even more to that point, how she got called back into technology was through a quasi non-technological position in many ways. I mean, if we're going to like use the conventional understanding of what technology is, and how it was about student loans and giving people access to these universities that we're at.
I ended up applying for this tech job, and I was drawn to it. I think it was the only tech job that I applied to, but I was drawn to it because it had a sort of social impact purpose. And it was a student loan company, and their focus was really on enabling access to education financing for international students who didn't have any sort of access to those financing opportunities if they were going to grad school abroad. So folks coming from Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, US, vice versa. And if they're going to Europe, US, and trying to go to Stanford Law School or Harvard Business School or Penn Law or wherever it is, they can't get a loan in this foreign country. And if you're coming from Argentina and your currency's devalued, I mean, there's just a lot of issues, right? And this is sort of, a huge problem that I ended up sort of falling into, and worked at that company for a couple of years doing business development, working with schools, students, and internally, cross-functionally across teams. And although I was in tech, my role was to sort of be a bridge, right? And to communicate all these different issues, whether it's technical issues or social issues that we had, and translate them into business problems. Like how do we solve this, right? So that was sort of my foray into tech inadvertently before coming to law school.
Just as an American, yes, we do have a loan problem. I mean, relatable. But just even to access those loans and access that financing is in many ways, I hesitate to say a privilege, but at least an opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, loans themselves, very interesting technique. An applied skill, a tool. To move wealth around efficiently, but and really this is like enhancing that technology, through supplements. I mean that I thought really just kind of fuses what we see as social justice or societal problems and technology problems.
Yeah, for anyone thinking about taking out student loans, I just want to echo that hesitation is a completely healthy thing.
Oh my God.
Maybe explore that.
Nothing was, I think, at least for me, the decision, getting into law school, a very exciting moment. And then I was confronting 6 figures of debt. And it really made me take a step back. And and almost, I mean, in many ways, and depending on when you asked me my law school career, I was like, I shouldn't have done this. Yeah.
But the point being, you could do it.
Could what? Do what? Sorry.
Like you had the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
To take out loans. To chase the dream that you had that you were like nervous about not taking a chance on yourself to take.
And meanwhile, and it's even more interesting to like think about that conversation that we had about like the risk of going to law school.
And there's always going to be some degree of risk, but if you're not taking any risk at all, then you can't be a first mover. I think being a first mover, almost by definition, will involve some risk. And
oh yeah, and I'm a risk-averse person. I think we all are because we're lawyers, and that's the common narrative. That's the common narrative about lawyers, even though it's probably false. Because if you think about it, you're risking a whole career off a $300,000 education that is supposed to send you to a firm. So
it's doing its job,
risk.
It's a well-oiled machine.
No, but I think you're right. It's a lot about risk taking. I'm not someone who generally is the biggest risk taker, but I think that in my excitement and optimistic viewpoint of hopefully being able to find a different type of solution, because clearly certain issues have not been solved yet.
But you're still buying a house in many states, not in California, but you're still buying a house for a piece of paper to then have more opportunities, hopefully. You know, there's a risk embedded that we were given access to. Other people just can't even start that absent people in these spaces who are able to make the technology move in a way that opens those doors.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I thought Magali presented a very balanced, I guess, approach or discourse on the social impact of technology, because you could see it. She was consciously putting on a more optimistic hat at times. Other times, kind of, speaking based on her own intuitions about technology, which started with aversion. And but I think that ultimately she was able to point out a pretty compelling method for people who are interested in serving the public, or who are interested in addressing social problems that we've dealt with for generations, which is, when you're looking at technology, she mentioned that you should just ask some 3 basic questions.
One, people, who is doing this, right? This isn't just something that occurs. It's not just a phenomenon. People drive these initiatives. People drive these projects. People build technologies. It is still, at the end of the day, driven by people. So who is doing that? That's like the biggest condition. And so if it's only going to be a small group of folks, and if it's going to be mostly folks who are male, cisgender, white, the traditional folks that you see sort of building these major companies, at least the ones that we know about and hear about and that are valued by society the most, that's going to be sort of an issue. I mean, you're not going to be able, it depends who you're trying to impact, right? So social impact for who? If you're trying to impact, communities abroad, you're going to need people from those communities to be doing part of the innovating. You can't just do this in a vacuum. So who is the number one sort of condition? 2, how funding. I mean, we could have a whole, I think, other episode on funding and what that means for the whole VC world, what that means for different alternative ways of fundraising for people to have a lower barrier to entry to build products, to build companies that want to do really impactful things. So that's the how piece that needs to sort of be solved. That's an important condition for, achieving any sort of social impact. And lastly, I think, yes, lots of different technologies can create social impact. And I think what I am most excited about is right? Like, what social impact are we going to be focusing on? I think there's a lot of distractions going on right now, and there's obviously a lot of important social issues, but the biggest piece of this is sort of what social issues do we think are the most important? Do we value the most to solve?
Who's doing it? Who are the people who are implementing, creating, controlling the technology? Then how? How is it funded? Where's the money coming from? And because that has serious implications for how that technology will be used and where the impact will be. And then finally is what social impact? How do you define that? And how do you define that in a way that is salient for the technologies that you're experimenting with? And overall, so there's the ethos of experimentation. Find a way to experiment in a way that's safe, but also fair. And because when you take that risk, when for example, she mentioned RMK, a dancing group in San Francisco.
I'll give RMK as an example, right, of an application that I'm trying to solve for, because I think could be a million applications, but to be specific and concrete, I think Black artists deserve ownership up front of their work. They've been ripped off for centuries and not credited for forever. And this is a way, and I'm saying those statements as hyperbolic statements to make a point, not to be taken literally, but if we do look at the numbers, I don't think I'd be far off. I think that it is a really cool opportunity for artists of color in particular to reclaim ownership of their work. And not necessarily reclaim, I should rephrase that, to state and claim ownership of their work from the start. So instead of having to sort of backtrack and negotiate and work in these existing frameworks of how the music industry works and how the dance world works and how the theater world works, etc., which are these sort of pre-made systems that don't allow for incredible flexibility. So with RMK, we have been thinking about, so just for background, RMK is a Black-founded dance company founded by Robert Moses.
My brother would love this. He's a dancer, so this is like right up his alley. I'm definitely gonna have to send him this like interview as soon as we're done.
Well, amazing. Well, if he's in the Bay Area, we're actually having our home performance in April, first weekend of April, in San Francisco. So definitely encourage everyone to attend. So RMK was founded in the 90s and is a really innovative dance group that cares about communities of color, especially in the Bay Area. And they do a lot of community service with elderly folks in the community, with the youth. They do a lot of youth programs. And they really try to use the intersection of dance and social justice to change the way people think about issues, to change how people think about art, to reimagine what they think about themselves through these experiences that intersect art and social justice. So caring a lot about RMK and what they're trying to do as a dance company, and as a former dancer myself, I shouldn't say former, I still dance, but modern and ballet.
Very cool.
So yes, shout out to all of my Stanford dance professors who were incredible, including Robert. That's how I met him. And I care a lot about those things. And I said, okay, well, one thing that we struggle with as a nonprofit is enough fundraising. And the nonprofit space is just saturated with a lot of sort of grant funding, and grant funding is incredible. That is much needed, and we're going to still heavily rely on that. But what would it look like for a nonprofit to be able to still capitalize on some of these extreme profits from blockchain? We can do our nonprofit work, but do we have to have no resources to do that? We could do more work with more resources.
To, your one or two donors who want to see things done in the specific way that might deviate from your mission internally.
Yes, or even just being able to have the freedom, the liberty of investing in the same programs that you would have anyway with the grant money, but at a larger scale. There's only so much grant funding that goes around. So what can you do to start establishing long-term stability and growth for a nonprofit? Crypto is something that we're thinking about. It's an experiment. We don't know if that's going to work out. We don't know if that's going to be helpful. And it seems ironic because if I say crypto, a lot of people will say, and stability in the same sentence, they would say, those things don't go together. What are you talking about? And we could talk about NFTs and get into that, but thinking of it from a holistic blockchain perspective, there are a lot of different opportunities. Crypto donations, something that we're working on, we're trying to get through. There's a lot of barriers to doing that as a nonprofit, I'm realizing. And also working on different innovative projects. So NFTs are a really incredible space for artists. Right now, it's currently saturated by a particular type of art, a lot of AI art, a lot of sort of tech.
A lot of bored apes.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, there's a word for it, but I don't know exactly how to call it. New age, it's 2022 art. And it's a specific type. And what I would love to see is more artists of color in that space. but it's really hard. I mean, you first have to get crypto. You then have to understand, like, what's this wallet thing? Oh, and I also need an exchange. Oh, and I need to use ETH, and I need to pay extra fees. I need to pay gas fees to then put up an NFT. Where do I put it up? Where does it live? What's in the contract? How do you get the contract up? It seems so easy when people talk about it. Oh my gosh, smart contracts, NFTs are simplifying everyone's world. You can create royalties, and that narrative is true at the same time as the opposite narrative. They coexist at the same time, depending on who's doing it. So I think that's sort of the biggest takeaway that I've had from this space is, you know, I've done a ton of reading on my own to really learn about this space. I've had incredible mentors, friends, and people to speak with about, you know, I talked to my boyfriend about this. I talked to one of my best friends, Shannon, who I mentioned before, about this, and to start learning, right? And I think that that's the goal here, is to really learn and also bring other people in with you while you're learning, so that it doesn't feel like that heavy of a barrier, or that, yeah. So with RMK, that's been a unique experience, trying to explain things to a very, very non-technical audience and break it down in terms of how can this be helpful for us? Why should we try to explore it? And we're in the midst of it. So I'll let you know in a couple of months how it goes.
When you take the risk of experimenting with new technologies, you're also opening doors. You're expanding the access and the knowledge of people about those technologies and what they can do and what they might do in the future. And we're going to get a lot of new ideas from that. And so experimentation in itself,
whether it succeeds or fails.
Yeah, whether it succeeds or fails, you've already succeeded at least in expanding that conversation, in doing what, in my opinion, in doing what we do.
Yeah. And when it comes to engaging like with the tech sector, or sort of like venturing into the tech sector, I found it really cool that like she applied to one technology company because like the mission resonated with her. And I think that's great. I think like if you're just blanket applying to tech companies because you think that it's like they have like bouncy balls and like ping pong, which like they probably do, but like you're going to become quickly disenchanted with the fact that like not all tech companies are doing like world-changing things, or maybe they are, but maybe it's not the like change that you want to see. So I thought that was really cool.
And in many ways, it reminded me of why I find tech so compelling and kind of like not a calling, because that's too high, but like just really very drawn to it.
You're more than that.
Part of the advice I got from my mentor, or part of my, and I've talked to you about this a lot, August, part of my reason of fully committing and diving into tech, there are no Black people, much less Black queer people. Not unlike there are very, very few. I mean, I hesitate to say none because there are enough, and you can, they're there. But that pipeline is not nearly as broad and big as it should be, because I can't represent anyone despite the expectations sometimes I feel or that others might put onto me to do so. But when we have like a diversity of people here, all of a sudden, just like ownership, she's talking about how can we use blockchain to, with an artist background as well, how can we use blockchain to cut out the middleman and create more opportunities for ownership, create more opportunities to own the culture that in broad strokes, they don't, like Black people, like, they don't own the culture. It maybe create in many aspects, but ownership, that's everything. That's how, at least in this society, how the engine runs. And ownership can dictate whether or not you even have a chance at pushing the envelope or even being seen and heard.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that Magali was very aware that so many people, when they hear crypto, if they think of anything at all, they're not thinking about historical racial justice. Certainly not, compensating people for their creative endeavors when those have been systematically robbed. They might not even know about that historical phenomenon. And this kind of goes to Magali's general way of learning, which is always incorporating her whole network.
At the time, I had a really good friend of mine, Shannon Wu, who is an incredible leader in the blockchain space, in the tech world. She is incredible, fantastic, highly recommend you all chat to her too. And anyone listening, please look her up. She is often, I think, the person behind the scenes moving a lot of pieces. And at the time, she was like, buy Bitcoin. This was 2013 or 2012. I was like, I have $300 in my account and I'm eating at the dining hall and I'm saving that. I've been working at a desk job to save that up. I'm not giving my little $300 to anyone or anything. I have no idea what this is. No thanks. Well, it's 2022 and joke's on me. But, I think that a couple years ago, I guess, was it 2020 or 2021? My boyfriend was like, you need to take another look at this, give it another shot. Because I had been sort of blinders on, okay, I see some cool things happening, but I don't really see how it's applicable to the issues that I'm interested in. So that, I think, is an intersection that I think is really, really a huge opportunity for creating social change. But I'm already starting to see some of the same issues that have popped up in other fields with actually creating meaningful change. And so that's part of the reason why I was like, hey, it's earlier enough in this space. What can I do to learn from this? Instead of just observing what I think are the issues from afar, why don't I just get involved a little bit closer so that I'm not just feeling totally powerless in this space and I can try my best to, change whatever direction I see certain things going in.
Talking to her mom, her family, her friends, learning from them, teaching them at the same time, and then getting insights from them.
Reading an article, talking to a friend, sending something to a friend and being like, I don't know what I just read. What is this? Do you understand this? Or bringing it up to your parents and looping them in. I'm now starting to get emails from my mom saying, oh, something about NFTs thought I'd share with you, which is...
My mom does that too. The more I got into tech, she's like, this seems like an interesting thing. She's very social justice oriented towards with some racial equity angle.
I love that. Well, yeah, it is. This is a stark difference from beforehand where she was like, sounds risky. I don't know. I mean, she still thinks that way, but, she's on this journey with me, right? I can't be on this journey if I don't bring her along.
And that's, I think, something pretty insightful, especially for people who are on the periphery of tech and of power and wealth, which is
more and more becoming one.
Yeah. I mean, and all those things are closely overlapping. It's as you are trying to acquire new knowledge, to teach yourself, to learn things. Bring others with you because you will learn better that way. You'll also stay connected to the issues that you care about. You'll have better knowledge than others who don't have access to those particular individuals. And also you'll be able to have that focus that she had when she picked one tech company, rather than just trying to be appealing to all of them, because it's connected to those issues.
And this is something I've thought more and more about, in considering, we all have big decisions about, where we're going to work, where we're going to live after law school. I think, I used to think, okay, I'm going to be a tech lawyer, so the goal is to, become, get integrated into Silicon Valley. And I don't think that is, necessarily needs to be the goal. I think the goal is to, understand Silicon Valley, understand the tech sector, and if you want to, export the good parts of it to other parts of the country or other parts of the world that, could benefit from.
It even calls me back to why, or not even why, just I've just been thinking about when I first heard of NFTs, it really wasn't that long ago. It was like maybe 6 to 8 months ago. And I brought it up to my copyright professor, whom I really respect and love. He's a great professor, but I brought it up and he immediately shut it down as it's a scam. And meanwhile, on Twitter, my exposure to NFTs have often been paraded in this narrative of, you know, Black art, Black owned, like all these different, the social justice angle where, you know, perhaps what we're purchasing with an NFT doesn't necessarily need to be tangible in the conventional sense of, hey, I have a White Claw, I bought this. You know, the benefit, you know, is, and I remember I read an article that came to my LinkedIn of just like, you're buying into an idea or you're buying into, you know, a general person's view of the world, and you're adding your stake to that in support. In this kind of weird way, or not weird, just like I think innovative way of seeing technology not necessarily as an ends to a mean or a means to an end, but as a path, or I guess it's the same thing, but like as a pathway toward correcting some of these issues that we have lived with in historic inequities, that, hey, here's this new technology and it can get directly to the artist you want it, and it can help them do all these new things that they had to go through a label before to do. Kind of like when the internet first came, where the internet was cutting out the publisher in many ways and enabling me to connect with the 42 people, the people in the 42 countries that the Periphery's been downloaded in.
We hear you, 42 countries.
You know, it's just making me think about like what is our goal here? Like what is our goal with innovation? What is our goal with technological proliferation? Is our goal to create more value? And what do we mean by value? Do we mean by, like, what really do we mean by value? If we're just talking economics, we're going to really miss the point, I think. Like, why should the point just be making as much money as possible, or finding a way to build a business model to like we know how businesses work and corporations. They're not really thinking about ownership in the ways in a you know, critical justice lens. They're not really thinking about equity. They're not really thinking about racism or sexism. But we do, you know, we experience them, we live them, and, you know, how do we actually apply the technology in a way that doesn't necessarily need to be financial?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like NFTs, even like Patreon. It's not creating value. It's like recognizing pre-existing value.
This is like this is like an appeal to our patrons to not leave us because we totally neglect them.
Keep recognizing our value. Keep it up.
I'm like, yeah, like we're making really good content.
I mean, but I think that this is a very important point, I think, that we're discussing, which is, yeah, we need to make sure that economics, while it has its place, is one part of the picture and not the default lens. I mean, what does it mean to look at NFTs through a diversified lens? I mean, one aspect that I think a lot of people find absurd about NFTs is, of course, that you're buying something that is not tangible, and yet you're treating it like art. You care about the original, even though there's no, I guess, physical difference.
Non-fungible.
Yeah, it's utterly non-fungible. It just defies people's basic sense.
Non-exclusive.
Yeah, it defies people's basic common sense as consumers. But let's just set that irrationality aside and look at the fact that this is also kind of resetting the artistic market, assuming that this demand will hold, and allowing Black artists to actually get credit in a way that has never occurred before, at least in this country. And if we look at that kind of moral value of NFTs, that has to be a part of the calculation before we dismiss it as something that is just a big fraud. I mean, arguably, if it should a thriving, you know, Black creative economy grow on the basis of NFTs, you know, just dismissing it as fraud is it might be hurting a lot of people. You know, we should recognize and have a nuanced sense of the good that is produced.
I guess one more thing before we might close off yet another, again, awesome, exciting, top class episode.
I can't wait to just drop a terrible episode one day. Just intro and go.
If it's terrible, I won't say it. It just started off with the same exact enthusiasm.
But this time we mean it.
But and maybe we can insert the clip of Jonas talking about incentives and his appeal towards getting more people involved. Like, this is exactly it. This is applying, you know, the general tenets of why we even started this podcast to, in the first place, of, hey, there's a lot of information and a lot of cool things happening here, and very, very little access, at least to the level that we have purchased with FAFSA. And that's like the tragedy of it all. Like, this stuff is so cool, so world-changing, life-changing, and mind-bending, yet it cost us an insane amount of capital to get access to it. And moreover, it's not like built into that is what got us here, which is even more inaccessibility, even more privilege, and even more. Meanwhile, to actually be in the room and to like start learning the issues and understanding them, a year ago I knew nothing about tech. Literally, I knew nothing. And it took me it took an interest and a curiosity and seeing myself inside of these rooms to actually start to even think of doing anything about it, to even think about experimenting with tech. I mean, really, like, this kind of experiment, we got microphones, we got a computer, we've got internet. This is an experimentation, not unlike experimenting with blockchain to fund a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it takes a bit. It takes a particular kind of situation right now to discover that you actually have a lot of the knowledge that it takes, that is needed to create effective applications of technology for the public interest and effective tech policy. People have this knowledge. They build it up all their lives, yet they don't see themselves as tech people. And that concept is a prison.
Yeah, it is. Yes. Yeah. Like, you're all tech people.
And the curiosity is huge. And I feel this tug to include a disclaimer, which I know that you guys would all agree with, which is that, like, if you want to be a lawyer and you're interested in technology, you don't have to go to Stanford. You don't have to go to any other school that, like, someone tells you that you just don't. Like, there might be other reasons you decide to go. And if you do, like, I validate you. That's great. Like, whatever you choose to do for you, but don't feel like you're any less valid in that space because, like, you made a decision that took other factors into account. And I think that is beautiful.
Yeah, it's going to make you, in many ways, the uniqueness of the experience is going to add so much value to the applications that we have yet to discover. We're not gonna solve anything if it's just coming from the ivory tower way up here, like, ever. Like, our problems are so stupid.
I mean, so to close out, and I think this is a very clean way to close out because it touches on, I think, what we mentioned at the very beginning of this season, where we talked about application. Find the problems, find the tools, and then put them together, and then see if you can solve it. And that is something that I think we're, like, resting on season 1 and using those tools for. I mean, we were already talking about Kai and what we learned from him. But I mean, this is truly the method stage of beginning to identify problems. Also, what Jonas talked about is find the problem first. And similar to Jess, your disclaimer about being a lawyer in technology, don't focus on the technology. Focus on the problem that you want to solve, and really go into that. Figure out why it motivates you, and I think that the technologies that will be relevant to you will become obvious.
And if you feel inspired to join the conversation,
of course,
please don't forget to follow us on all the socials, on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram. And, if you find value and you want to support our little experiment, little tussle, maybe that's the wrong word, but little experiment to broaden the conversation and bring more people in. We're also on Patreon, and we appreciate all the support that we get, even if it's just a like or a share or a simple download. They all help.
Yeah, shoot us an email.
Yeah, shout out to our new Patreon subscriber. What was his name?
Talal. We love you, Talal. As well as all the other 5.
Sorry, 5, I meant 50. 50.
5 Patrons, 42 countries. Okay, we're impressive. And yes, shoot us an email at theperiferypodcast@gmail.com if you have an issue you want us to discuss, if you have a question. We love voice notes, and we will include your voice note in the beginning of the episode, and you can frame a topic for us to endeavor, because we are nerds and we will spend the time doing the nerdy things. So you can just sit back and listen and enjoy. See you next week.